Hi guys, today we are going to be talking about how you can add texture to your wall hanging. So texture is something that really makes things pop. We already have things popping because we've done some additive, so adding clay on, and then we've also done some subtractive where we've carved down in. Now, craftsmanship wise, this is still pretty messy. Remember, that will be the last thing that we will focus on, but you want to start most of your texture once you have already figured out what your different levels are and you've added or carved in, because nobody wants to put texture on something and then end up having to carve it away because you need to go deeper. So I feel like I'm at that point. Texture can be created with anything really. I mean, I could take my knuckle, for instance, and just kind of hit it into the clay. But most of the texture we're talking about today, we want to apply once the clay is leather hard. So remember, you know it's leather hard when it has just a little bit of wiggle, it doesn't bend a lot. And you'll notice that it feels a little more sturdy. So when I hold my slab, it's holding its form compared to previous levels. If you notice that it's getting white in areas, that means it's getting too dry. And in that case, you might need to spray it with some water and wrap it tightly till it gets a little softer. So in your kits, you have lots of different tools. We've got needle tool, we've got our fettling knife, we have our wire tool, loop tool, that you guys have already been using to do carving. And we also have wooden tools, and you have these in all different shapes. So depending on what you have, you can do different textures with it. So you want to think about your theme and what would maybe make sense. You don't have to have a texture on everything, and even choosing some areas to be smooth and some to be textured is a really nice way of creating contrast. So I know for me, I want the bee to be really, really smooth, and I also want the surface of the sun to be really smooth. I know in the background, I'm going to add a little bit of carving that kind of comes out in angles around the sun because it will give a little bit of texture and make it look more like a sun. And then I know for the mountains, I'm going to use a variety of different textures. So you can always just start by trying a texture, or if you have an extra piece of clay, sometimes it's nice to start in that way. But I'm going to start with my front mountain here. And I'm just gonna see what happens when I push this piece of clay or this wooden tool into it. So I'm noticing a shape that's kind of being created here. And if I like it, great. If I don't, I can always go back as long as it's not too deep, and I can kind of erase it using my sponge with just a small amount of water. Remember, if you add a ton of water at this point, it's not gonna be leather hard anymore. So this is kind of a way that you can experiment with what you like. I personally really like this texture. And what I like the most about it is it kind of goes really deeply, and I think that's gonna look really nice because the glaze will be able to sit in it. When it comes to texture, don't be afraid to really push into the clay, because if you just do something really light on the surface, the glaze might cover it up. And remember, we want that contrast. So we want it really deep, and then we want it to have the smooth next to it so that you have that really nice contrast. And the glaze will pick up on that too. So far I like what I'm doing here. I think I would continue it all the way around, but let's talk about some other things that you can do. Your loop tool, this is a great one. Some of you might have even noticed some of the texture when you were carving, and you might like it the way it is. Or in my case, I mentioned, I think I want to go and just carve a little bit deeper and create some lines that kind of come from the sun, just to exaggerate the fact that it's an O in his name, but it's also a sun. Now you can look at what you have, and let's say I wanted sharper lines, I might turn it so I just have the corner here. As I'm doing this, you see all of these crumbs. Make sure as you go, you take the time to get those off. Sometimes a paintbrush is really nice for that. If you don't get them off and then you apply your sponge to it, they'll actually stick back in, and it can kind of be problematic for you. Some other things, I mean, even the back of your needle tool, this is a perfect circle, so you could create some really cool textures with that. Really, any tool you can come up with is great for texture. The one thing I will keep you or encourage you to stay away from is just the tip of your needle. This is really good for planning. So let's say I wanted to have stripes here on this middle mountain range, okay? The needle tool makes such a fine line, and it actually makes all these little crusty edges that once you fire it, it makes it really sharp, and it's difficult to get the glaze to sit down in it and clean it up. So the needle tool is great for planning. If you want to do something really small, you can sketch it out. but it's better to go back with a sharpened pencil and do your detail just a little bit wider. So I'm gonna go back over some of these lines that I already started. Sometimes with such a specific texture, something that uses a pencil, you might have to go over it several times, but this is just the basics to get rid of it. Give me 1 minute. All right, so I'm wiping away the clay that's in the way, and you see that some of it got into those grooves. So all I would do next is I would go back over it once or twice more. And this is something, as the clay hardens and you get to the craftsmanship phase, you can go back and clean them up a lot more. So remember, the goal is to really think outside of the box. What textures are gonna make your different layers pop? For smooth, just to quickly go over that, it's kind of something you'd more work on when we get to craftsmanship, but a tiny bit of water on the sponge goes a long way. You can start to kind of press it over the clay, and you'll see that your shapes start to really smooth out. Sometimes it's also nice once you add that bit of water to just smooth around the edges, and you'll notice a significant difference already. I still have some like extra clay that I want to get rid of with a loop tool, but you get that it looks a lot more smooth. So don't forget, texture is really important to really make your piece come alive, and our last video will be on craftsmanship.